Hello, everyone. It's Jasmine here, and welcome to episode 129 of Eat, Move, Think. Well, it's around the middle of summer, and a lot of us have been lucky enough to take some time off to travel, spend time with loved ones, and sometimes taking a break from work can really make you stop and think about burnout and mental health and wellness when it comes to the careers and the jobs that we do each and every day. So for this episode, we've created an encore presentation of one of the best interviews yet, featuring Walmart Canada's Chief Operations Officer, Nabeela Ixtabalan, and Medcan CEO Shaun Francis. Nabeela was recently named one of the Globe and Mail's best executives of 2022, and in this conversation, she shares the story of how her own self-care strategies helped her get to where she is today. Here's Shaun Francis in conversation with Nabeela Ixtabalan.
Thanks for joining on the Eat, Move, Think podcast. I've been a big fan of everything Walmart's done for their employees, and a big fan of some of the work you're doing in wellness and your connection with Ariana Huffington and the Thrive Global Initiative. So I'm curious, and maybe, I'm sure our listeners will be curious, if you could just go back in time and relay some of your history. You were a workaholic in high school and university, and that really transcended through to your career. But maybe if you could give us some of that history, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I learned at a very young age that you could achieve a lot through hard work. So when I found out, for example, I could finish high school instead of 3 years or 4, I jumped at the opportunity. And so in my junior year of high school, I was going to regular high school during the day and taking my senior year at night. Then I started working quickly after that, and at a very young age, worked full time, went to school at night. And I just got into this habit of trying to take on as much as I possibly could. And it was working for me. I was accomplishing a lot. And at a very young age, I started running multi-million-dollar companies for large retailers. I was running a $1 million business when I was in my early 20s. I was running a $130 million business when I was in 25, 26, responsible for a lot of people. And I started to kind of build this habit of just filling my plate as much as I possibly could, so to speak, until eventually it caught up with me. What I was doing is basically training my body to tolerate as much work as I possibly could without really recognizing the long-term effects it was having on me personally. I was learning bad behaviors around just this idea of hustling all the time and working all the time, and thinking that was the journey to success, like that was the key to success.
So when did you make that transition from education into running that small business and the larger business? Because that I'm sure would be of interest to our listeners.
I never did one or the other. I always did both. So I came from a family where I had to pay my way through college and went to university in the States, which is very expensive. So I worked full time running multiple Starbucks coffees at the time in the Midwest. And I went to school at night, and it took me 6 years to graduate. And then when I graduated, I was 7 months pregnant with my first child. So I went straight from full-time work and school to full-time work and being a new mom. Then after my son was 5, I decided to go back to school and get my master's. So full-time mom, 5-year-old, and a master's. And then after I finished my master's, I had my daughter. So it was basically like a continuous build of, I think just trying to achieve as much as I could in a short amount of time. And that's the workaholism. Like what I was establishing. I was just kind of addicted to work and keeping my plate as full as I possibly could. And
when did you have that aha moment where you realized that maybe that work was transcending your life?
Yeah, the first time I realized that I wasn't able to successfully cope with everything I had added to my life was after my daughter was born, and I struggled with postpartum depression. And I think the challenging thing about my experience is that I was okay at work. So I could go to work and function successfully and no one would know the wiser. But at home, I was struggling significantly. And I think, again, the challenge in my case is that I didn't tell anybody. I was afraid of affirming a stereotype that I couldn't handle being a mom and doing a high demanding job. And I was afraid that if I shared my struggles with postpartum depression, that, it would somehow inhibit me or make it feel like I was failing. So I struggled in silence. And then ultimately, while I was struggling with postpartum, I started getting anxiety attacks. And I had my first anxiety attack on the side of a Houston highway when I was on my way home from a really difficult day. I thought I was having a heart attack. Like, I was having shortness of breath. I was dizzy. I had a hard time just kind of even processing where I was or what was happening. And I was thankful enough I was able to pull over and regain some composure and then make my way to urgent care, where I saw medical assistance and realized I was having an anxiety attack. And then after that, really started on a long-term journey to rebalance my life and get the coping mechanisms I needed to succeed.
So talk to us about that. I mean, how you go from the anxiety attack, not probably knowing it's an anxiety attack.
Yeah, I thought I was having a heart attack.
Yeah. And how did they diagnose that it was anxiety? I guess they ruled out you were having a heart attack?
So I was in urgent care, and I think it was all the symptoms of an anxiety attack. I think they very quickly saw that it was an anxiety attack. I also got, at the time then, I think, diagnosed with postpartum depression, which I hadn't actually sought the right treatment or diagnosis either. So I went on a journey of healing my both postpartum depression and the anxiety itself. But ultimately, no matter what kind of medical support you're going to get, these things require life changes, right? So I had to unlearn behaviors of, overworking myself. I had to get better sleep. I had to make sure I was taking better care of my health physically in terms of how I was eating and exercising. And I had to focus on my spiritual well-being, which was a big part of my journey as well. So to just reset my entire life. And it's taken many years. And through that journey, I built something I call my baseline, which is a set of binary things that I must maintain in order to take care of myself. And if I don't do those things over a period of time, I know that I might slip into difficulties. So it's something I take very seriously.
So I want to get into that in a moment, but let's walking back. So you get the diagnosis, I guess, which is the first step, really, of what's going on.
Yeah.
And then from there to action, how did you make that leap?
I had a hard time holding my daughter. I had a hard time being a mom. I had a hard time getting through the normal things that you do as a mom with a young baby. I was struggling with some of the basic functions of just caring for her. And of course, there's a lot of guilt that comes along with that and it was a very odd experience for me because I didn't have that experience with my son, my firstborn. So I was really committed to just getting better so I could be there for her and also stop having the experiences I was experiencing myself. So I actually created a 1-year plan with my therapist, and it involved medication. It involved, spiritual meditation or wellness. It involved reducing my workload and reconfiguring the things I was doing in my life. It involved getting a support system in place. So it was a year-long journey to get better.
We touched on this a few minutes ago, but you started to develop, was it over that period of time, this baseline?
So the baseline didn't really come up until several years later. I mean, the first year was really a lot of concentrated support from medical providers and experts. So, I don't want to minimize postpartum depression or anxiety. If you're facing those things, you need the right expertise, the right network of therapists, psychologists, your primary care physician. That needs to be treated by medical professionals. I don't think a baseline is going to do the right work. But after I got through, I think, recovering from postpartum depression, some of my anxiety continued. I still had anxiety at varying degrees, crying spells, things of that nature, where I wasn't really coping with the stress of my life in a healthy way. So I continued with therapy, and through therapy built this baseline and started to be able to recognize the signs in myself when I knew I needed to step back and reevaluate either my personal life or my professional life or my physical health or my mental health. So the baseline really developed over many years. And now it's written down on a piece of paper. It's in in multiple places. And I literally on a weekly basis, I check it and say, have I met these requirements? And if not, I reset.
Was the therapy CBT based?
It was, and I've had multiple therapists over the last 10 years, but I now see therapy as regular maintenance. And I'm, quite open that, I see a therapist and I encourage others to do the same. I think especially for everybody, to be honest, in today's day and age, we all need to be seeing therapists.
I totally agree, especially during COVID.
Yes.
Yeah. So how long have you been with Walmart now?
So I joined Walmart in August. I actually relocated internationally from Sweden to Toronto. So I tell people, I went through an international relocation. I started a new job in the middle of a pandemic. And had I not had these mechanisms to protect my mental, emotional, spiritual health, I would be at this point, I think, a babbling idiot. So the fact that I think, I've been able to successfully make this transition, in my mind, a proof of the power of these types of behaviors and practices that you can build into your life.
I mean, I know at Medcan, we onboarded a few new executives during the pandemic. And of course, they couldn't meet anyone physically, which is the most unique and weirdest onboarding anyone's going to have, or at least, pre-COVID. So I bet you that was pretty unusual to relocate to a new country in a lockdown, not meeting anyone.
I was able to meet a few members of my team before we went into the no more than 10 people inside regulation. But, you find ways to connect with people. And I think just trying to share my story and being authentic, you start to build relationships in new ways. So trying to do that.
Maybe you could walk us through, if you have it, your baseline, because I know it would be super interesting for folks to know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of my baseline is actually protecting time for spiritual health. And you can consider this in any variation. So whether it's religiously oriented or not, for me, my faith is a big part of who I am, and it gives me a lot of peace and tranquility. So I do protect like a weekly meditation circle. Now it's being done virtually, where I meditate in congregation with other people, and also daily prayer. So that's a really important part of my baseline. And then eating all my meals, simple as it is. I think, again, when you get busy and your plate is really full, you tend to skip breakfast, you skip lunch, you don't eat all your meals. And I think skipping my meals is a sign that I'm out of balance. So just that's one of my baseline. Number 2, eat all my meals and not skip them to just do chores or work. And then the other one is maintaining my sleep. I need 7 hours to function at my peak, and anything less than that consistently is just a detriment to myself. So really being rigid about maintaining my sleep and having consistent uninterrupted sleep. The other one is having dinner with my kids. Again, this isn't something I was able to do previously. I think when we're all traveling a lot, skipping a lot of time with my kids. But having breakfast and dinner with my kids, and then working out 3 times a week. I'm now at a place where I work out every day. But when I built my baseline, just being able to commit to 3 times a week was really important. Getting outside once a week. And again, I have these binary measurements. So 3 times a week exercise, getting outside once a week, and just experiencing nature. And then the other one is making time for things I enjoy. I started writing as also a healing practice. And now I write even if it's a few lines every morning or before bed, and just kind of get my thoughts on paper. And then the last one is, and this was really affecting me as well, is paying attention to what I pay attention to. So I've actually turned off all of my news notifications. I don't get any notifications for news. I'm very selective about, what I consume in terms of news or media, and who are in my circle in terms of social media, and how I curate content so that I am not consistently exposing myself to negativity, because it does affect me personally. So I've deleted a lot of apps. I've changed a lot of my feed to make sure it's as positive as possible. And then, of course, as an executive in an important role, I still have to pay attention to the right things so I can do my job successfully, but I don't unnecessarily consume negative news. And so those are the things that are my baseline. And the way that I use it is at the end of every week, I check against those things. And if I can't say yes to that list of things that I've been able to meet it for a period of time, then I will literally sit down and say, okay, what do I need to change? So I either need to talk to my boss because something is out of whack at work, or I need to rethink things at home. What do I need to change to maintain my baseline? Because these are the things I need to keep in place in order to maintain my mental, emotional, spiritual, physical health and well-being.
Is it your way of tracking it simply, did I meet the baseline this week, or do you quantify it?
Yeah, if I miss more than 3 things for a period of time, then I reset. So I've set things are going to happen, right? It might go a week or 2 where I'm not able to consistently do all the things on my list. But if by week 3, I've missed, 3 or more things by week 3, then I reset.
When you joined Walmart, I read that you were quite intentional about the way you introduced yourself to the organization. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is also something else that I've grown into, is just my confidence to talk about this. And in my previous employer, I was not as open and vocal about these things. And I'm just done pretending that mental health and mental well-being is something that you should be ashamed of, or something that, I think senior leaders don't struggle with. So I'm done pretending. And so I introduced myself to 100,000 associates as a recovering workaholic. And I introduced myself with what I call a wall of failure. And instead of thinking about failure as a wall of shame, it's my failure wall of fame. And I talked about the 3 things that I'm really not good at, or I'm trying to learn. And one of those things was recovering from workaholism and trying to really emulate a different definition of success that doesn't include, martyring yourself for your job. And so there's been an overwhelming response. And by being open and transparent, it gives cultural permission for others to do the same.
I mean, you had the permission to do so at Walmart, and did that differ from other employers?
I didn't ask for permission. I just started, and I just had this sense of confidence that it would be okay. And I know in my previous employer, it would have been okay as well. I just wasn't there personally to share it so openly. I felt like new to a company, I had a chance to present myself in my truest form and with the most authenticity possible, instead of trying to, I think, live up to a brand that I had established previously. So it just felt like the right opportunity and the right time for me to be as authentic and open and honest as I possibly could. So that's what I did.
And, Walmart is one of the largest employers in Canada, 90,000 associates. How do you perceive the responsibility of the employer, to its associates, in particular with respect to wellness?
I think employers have an immense responsibility when it comes to wellness and well-being. So, Shaun, wellness and well-being used to be this thing that, companies would go after to help reduce their healthcare costs, right? It was like, that was really all it was. But, if anything, if there's a silver lining to this pandemic in any way, one of the things that it's done is shown a light and a magnifying glass on the mental health and mental well-being crisis. And mental health and mental well-being was here long before COVID, and it will be here long after. There's a mental health crisis that's happening in the world. And any employer that doesn't take acknowledgement of that and start to act much more aggressively around mental health and mental well-being, I think will be at a disadvantage for the future. Additionally, I believe that employees expect their employer to take an active role in their mental health and mental well-being by A, providing the right benefits and services, B, providing the right education and tools, and 3, by creating the culture and the permission to normalize the conversation. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Walmart Canada. We've made well-being a strategic pillar of our strategy, and we see well-being as a catalyst for growth. And we don't believe that there's a trade-off between well-being and performance. We actually believe that well-being will, accelerate performance for the future.
So let's go talk about that from an employer perspective. I mean, traditionally, from my perspective, employers have an EAP provider.
Yep.
When they check the box, we have a benefit. It's in the manual. There's an 800 number, and there might be some, value statements that we value this stuff, and that's pretty much where the journey ends. Is that
right?
Is that sufficient, or what are you doing tactically that would advance that? For our listeners, EAP stands for Employee Assistance Program.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I would say that in today's day and age, that is wholly insufficient. So, of course, we do have EAP programs, but since COVID has started, we've also provided our 90,000 associates access to virtual healthcare and support if and when they need it throughout the pandemic. And then most recently, we've also launched a partnership with Thrive Global and are making the Thrive Global app available to all 100,000 associates throughout Canada. And the app will help them build these micro steps into their lives to improve their overall health and wellness through better sleeping habits, through better eating habits, through better physical activity habits, through better mental agility habits. And this is actually something we recently sought after because we knew that this pandemic was going to continue, that this is a marathon, and we wanted to continue to add tools into the toolbox for our associates to have what they needed to continue to cope and have the tools that they needed to maintain their health and well-being. So that's the most recent addition to the toolkit. I think in addition to that, we're training leaders, because I think what's important in this conversation is that we normalize the conversation so people can talk about mental health and well-being, but also that our leaders know how to listen and act when someone's struggling, and really being able to have the compassionate conversations with the right context is a power skill that all our leaders need to have. So a lot of focus on training leaders as well on how to identify signs of mental illness, mental health, and how to direct and support our associates if they need help.
So Thrive Global is an initiative of Ariana Huffington. How did it come to being?
Yeah, so Ariana actually came to speak to the senior leadership group at Walmart Canada, and she came across the article I wrote on Mental Health Awareness Day about my baseline. She's been a role model of mine for many years, so I was quite smitten when I found out she actually read it. Yeah, and so we started a conversation after that and decided to bring Thrive Global and the Thrive ZP app to Canada and to all our associates.
And talk to me about the app for a moment. Is it all automated or are there human-to-human interactions?
Yeah, so what's amazing about that Thrive ZP app is that Walmart has commissioned this app with Thrive Global. And when you go into the app, it'll actually ask you if you're a Walmart associate, but it's actually free and available to everybody. You could be anyone. So the Thrive ZP app, we've made it free and it can be accessed for everyone. And then once you go into the app, you take a little bit of an assessment. It's got a plethora of knowledge on different aspects of well-being. So eat, sleep, meditation, and exercise. And you can go in there and make commitments to micro steps, something as simple as just starting your morning with a glass of water and lemon, or, taking a 60-second, reset in the middle of your day to meditate or to, find a moment for mental meditation or, make commitments for sleep. The other thing, what's great about the app is that we share each other's stories. So it creates a social context where Walmart associates are hearing and seeing from their colleagues and how they're applying these behaviors. And it's really through the power of storytelling that creates an incentive for others to do the same. Additionally, we've actually created an incentive for our associates. So associates who use the app, share their stories, are actually eligible for a monetary reward. So there's also an additional benefit to them besides their well-being to participate.
In terms of accessing EAP or sort of proactive connectivity to psychological help, is it reactive or is there any proactivity?
There's absolutely proactivity available for our associates to access EAP. We also have a very robust response system internally. If and when we have a leader who believes an associate needs extra care, we have a very robust way of responding to care for that associates internally, in addition to the benefits that we provide for them to seek help.
Now, to put the pandemic lens on this, obviously it's accelerated the use of virtual apps and also the discussion around mental health, because it's, people have a tremendous amount of anxiety with uncertainty, I think, of how this is playing out. How does this, how has this affected how you're managing at Walmart? And then perhaps comment on, what does the future look like?
I mean, from a broad strokes perspective, what we're trying to focus is on taking care of the urgent in the moment, which is changing on a daily basis. And that means protecting the safety and well-being of our associates and our customers, protecting the business and being able to provide an essential service to all Canadians with a daily changing landscape, as we all know. So that's the urgent. And I feel like, that focus will continue to be very high and prevalent for us, while also maintaining a focus on the really important and the more long-term. At Walmart Canada, we're trying to transform the business at the same time as dealing with the pandemic, and really both, focusing on the urgent needs that we have today and also transforming the business for the future. And when we think about the future, we believe that, as I said earlier, that well-being and wellness is going to be a catalyst for growth. And that's where we're trying to build this muscle in mental agility and resilience in the organization so that our entire population and workforce can have the organizational resilience to be relevant and continue to provide services for Canadians. And I think that's really the long game when we focus on well-being and we focus on mental health and we focus on is that you're building resilience in individuals, you're building resilience in the organization. And as we know in this VUCA world that's ever changing at a higher speed, that resilience is going to be essential to grow any business. So that's really the long-term focus is mental resilience, individual resilience, organizational resilience, leadership resilience. Lots of it, I think, has come by default, but we need to continue to build that muscle.
Walmart's a more traditional employer. Like you mentioned, it's essential services, and it has a massive in-person workforce that won't be on Zoom anytime soon. That said,
yes,
many executive functions are now remote. Do you and people comment and they say, that might be the future, right? People will remain televideoing into meetings. What's your crystal ball showing you?
Oh, yeah. Sure. I don't believe we'll ever return to a situation where we're fully returned to offices. I think that's very clear. At the same time, I don't think remote work through a global pandemic is the right litmus test for the possibilities of what remote work can provide, because there's so many other compounding factors that are happening today. Schooling at home, self-isolation, just all of the other things that come with the current situation. So my crystal ball is that remote work is here to stay and it will be a prevalent form of work for the future. But we shouldn't necessarily use our current time and experience as the benchmark for what it can be. I think it can be a lot more rich than what it is today. I would also say that remote work doesn't mean that you never meet people and you never interact. There's definitely remote work models where you are actually meeting people and you are interacting. And I hope we get to that place in time soon.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a new world. And I think it draws you to stay inside, right? It's almost anti-wellness in so many ways. Right, because you're not walking to get your water and lemon, or you're not meeting a colleague, or you can have loneliness, or you can have back-to-back meetings. You're not getting out and seeing nature, right? So in some ways, it's the anti-wellness movement.
This is actually something else that we've tackled. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we implemented no Zoom times. So we have a no Zoom window on Wednesday afternoon where no Zooms are allowed to be scheduled. We also have no Zoom times from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., as well as during lunch period. And this was really so that we could respond to the fact that people were having to homeschool their kids and needed that time in the morning to situate their children, needed the time to serve lunch, and needed time to kind of help their kids log off. We've also been immensely flexible with our associates who are dealing with both, schooling and working, and really tried to take an individual response to each and every associate that needs that extra flexibility. And then we've continued to build on those norms. So encouraging things like taking walking meetings or taking a phone call instead of a Zoom, and just being able to walk around. And in all of our meetings, we've implemented wellness practices. So we start with a 2-minute check-in. How are you? Just simply asking how people are doing makes an immense difference. But then also making sure we provide the right types of breaks for people to stretch, and then doing group physical activity like stretching or some other activity. We've also encouraged our associates to do an audit of their workspace so that they are physically set up in the right way, and making sure that they have access to the right tools and technology, such as standing desks or ergonomic chairs, so that they can have a healthy workspace. So we, since the beginning of the pandemic, have been giving our associates access to those things so they can have as healthy of an at-home workspace as possible.
This is fantastic. I want to thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
That was Medcan Chair and CEO Shaun Francis in conversation with Walmart Canada's Chief Operations Officer, Nabeela Ixtabalan. Follow Shaun on Twitter and Instagram at Shaun C. Francis, that's Shaun with a U, and follow Nabeela on Twitter at Nabeela Ix, that's Nabeelaix, or you can follow her on Instagram at Nixtabalan, that's Nixtabalan. You can also follow Medcan on Twitter and Instagram at MedcanLiveWell. We'll post episode highlights and links that you can visit on our website, eatmovethinkpodcast.com. Say hello and send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com. Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. I'm managing producer Jasmine Ratch, and executive producer is Christopher Shulgin. Social media and strategy support is from Chantel Gurton, Andrew Imex, and Emily Bosick. We'll be back soon with a new episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
This podcast is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only, and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations, and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with the specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.